This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
When it comes to decarbonizing the world, collaboration is the key. And this week, we're going to discuss the partnership between SunPower and Schneider Electric. In Menifee, California, they're building more than 200 state-of-the-art all-electric homes that will be solar-powered. Here to tell us more about it is Will Shippee, the Manager of Strategic Solar Accounts at Schneider Electric, and Matt Brost, Vice President of Sales at SunPower's New Homes Division. Will, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Before we get into the project itself, Will, let's give folks some context. Residential energy use accounts for roughly 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. Can you explain that number and why it's a major problem?
Yeah, I mean, it is a large number, and it's not necessarily so much of a problem as much as how complicated that number really is, right? So when you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, it's really a combination of both direct and indirect sources, right? So as you can imagine, when you're living in your home, you have those direct greenhouse gas emitters. You might have your stove, you turn on your air conditioning, that uses electricity, right? And so that is definitely a big chunk of it. But I think the other big chunk that people might not realize, right, is those indirect sources, right? And so that is, where is that electricity coming from, right? And throughout the United States, it's coming from a mixture of sources, right? So in the Pacific Northwest, it might come from hydro. Here in California, a lot of it's natural gas, right? In the Midwest, you might have mixes of coal and other generation sources. So it's really that combination of what is contributing, right? And what are those indirect and direct sources? I think we also have to look at is, what we're going to see in the future as far as, those sources as well as those loads. What are those things that are going to demand electricity? So just to give you some context, in 2030, half of every car sold will be an EV, right? And so when that homeowner drives that EV home, they're going to plug it in. And that's going to require a lot of electricity. So a big question and challenge we have is, okay, well, where is that electricity going to come from?
Also, there's another issue that I've been studying, that is charging electric vehicles on a fossil fuel grid also creates greenhouse gas emissions, even though, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Would you agree?
Absolutely, right. So I think that is something that a lot of people don't necessarily, keep in mind, right? They might have solar on their roof and plug in their car, but they might not be realizing that at that time, right, when they're charging that car, that power is coming from the grid. And They might not realize that the sources of power coming from the grid might shift. There might be certain times a day where that power coming from the grid is cleaner than other times of day where it might be coming from fossil fuel or coal generation sources.
Matt, another reason this project exists is that blackouts are on the rise and electric rates are going up, especially in places like California and electric grids based on fossil fuels. How bad is this, and how much worse can it get?
Well, that's a good question. We have certainly seen, I've been working with home builders for over 16 years, and I can tell you that 16 years ago, this just simply wasn't an issue. I would say in the last 5 or so years, we've really seen a surge in wildfires, which has created a number of grid outages, and to the point that the utilities, have named these public service power shutdowns in order to protect homeowners from the impacts of wildfire. And it's not just in any one location in California. These wildfires are happening throughout the state and impacting large numbers of customers on the grid. When you add to that the impacts that we're having in terms of high demand days, which are often called flex alert days here in California, where people are asked to control or manage their loads or conserve their consumption in order to not have a brownout or a blackout. We've seen the state get hotter and hotter, and we've just had a more significant number of these days and events over the past several years as we've seen temperatures increasing. So it's definitely, become a pretty big issue here in California, and likely other parts of the country is going to begin seeing this as well as we have seen it grow here.
Yeah, and we're seeing it here on Long Island, especially because we are a tourist community, and our peak actually is in the summertime when everybody is out here, and it's the hottest day of the year. And our infrastructure has to be built to that peak. We have peak generators actually that fill in for those peak hours, and they're beginning to use the solar panels and the electricity being generated on solar panels and battery backup and electric cars, to kind of shave what they call shave the peak. So yeah, it's happening all over the country.
No, and absolutely. And I mean, I think that is a great segue into this project in many ways, because as you point out, you've maximized your peaker plants on these days, right? And now you're looking for grid flexibility. When you look at 200 homes with battery storage systems in them and then a connected battery, in addition to flexible loads that can be dispatched to the grid, you have the potential in these subdivisions to provide quite a bit of capacity to the grid to help alleviate, these situations that we find ourselves in generally on hot days when, people are consuming due to air conditioning, getting home from work and that sort of thing is when and we're peaking. And so you can definitely see how projects like this are valued by the utility and will continue to be valued.
Excellent. That's absolutely correct. Matt, again, SunPower conceptualized the project and is the project lead. Can you take us back to how it all came together?
Yeah, I can. SunPower has had a partnership with KB Home for over a decade, very similar to Schneider's, having a long-term partnership with KB Home. We have a history of innovation with KB. We did our first net zero energy house in Florida over a decade ago with KB. We've done more net zero houses. We were the first to go all solar in their Southern California subdivisions about 8 or 9 years ago. And then there's been other innovative projects that we've done with them since then. So this came together, I think, largely because of our long-term collaboration efforts together to innovate. And 2019, we were actually anticipating the federal government to release funding opportunities for connected communities. We did not know when the funding would be released or the time frame to receive it, but we actually started meeting pretty early on with KB Home, discussing the project and putting together a blueprint of what we thought we could do. And so it was opportune that when the DOE, Department of Energy, did release the funding opportunity for connected communities, we were probably close to 80 or 90% through our draft proposal, as we've been working on it for probably a year and a half prior to the funding becoming available.
Well, Schneider Electric will design and engineer the community microgrid. Can you explain what a microgrid is and the role it plays with what you're doing?
Yeah, so a microgrid really is what it sounds like. It is an electrical grid that is shrunk down for a particular purpose. And so when you're looking at what an electrical grid really comprises of, it's really three building blocks, right? So at the beginning, you have your generation of power. You then have to move that power around, right? You have transmission. And then the last stage is the load, is the actual consumption of that electricity, right? And that can be anything from your EV, right, to your television and your fridge. And so a microgrid really takes those three major components and shrinks them down for the use of say, for example, a hospital, right, or a military base. In this situation, we're doing it for an entire community. So we have generation, right? We have solar on every single home. We have transmission, right? We also moving that power around. We have a community microgrid battery backup system, the BESS, right? That is also a source of power. That can then send power, through lines to each home. And then you have the last part, right? You have the consumers, you have the homeowners living their lives, right? And consuming that electricity in different ways.
So with this community microgrid, are you also net metering? For people who don't know what net metering is, during the daytime when the sun is shining and you're not at home, the electricity is put on the grid. And then, at night when the sun is not shining and people come home, they can draw from that grid, and so the net result is whatever the difference is between the two. Is this community also connected to the grid for a net metering type of situation?
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's, really, when you think about it, it's the best of both worlds because you have the ability to connect to the grid. So you are benefiting the grid, as Matt was mentioning earlier,
Right.
right? So
Right.
homeowners are able to generate their own power. They're able to send that power back to the grid when the sun is shining. They're off at work, right? The load, actually, the demand in their home is fairly low. So they're able to send that power back to the grid. And then, right, they can then take that power back from the grid at nighttime, right, or leverage their own battery backup system. But I think what's really exciting is what happens when the grid goes away. And that is when we're talking about the ability of islanding an entire neighborhood and leveraging the microgrid so that these homeowners can continue to live their lives and continue to have power even when the utility grid is down.
And from what I understand, also, is besides the battery that's being installed in these homes, also the EV, the electric vehicle battery, is also used in connection with this backup, right?
Yeah, I think this is something that is going to be very exciting. It's going to be a big challenge for all of
Okay.
us and the grid moving forward. Is what happens when we have what we're calling bidirectional charging, right? And so if you think about an electric vehicle, really all it is a rolling battery.
Right.
You can think of it really as the future of electrical transmission is not just going to be those power lines above your head and below your feet. It's going to be cars rolling on the street. And so what we're going to be seeing is there will be instances where people will be at work and they might be charging their car at work, right? And so when they get home, their car is almost already fully charged. And so rather than perhaps charging at home, they might be sending power back to the grid and back into the home. And again, this is something that is going to be very dynamic. It's going to be very challenging, managing all of those different, what we call distributed energy resources or DERs, right? Where you have all of these available resources of power and how do you manage and juggle those sources?
Yeah, that it can get complicated, but I'm guessing you guys are going to get it.
I appreciate that. We definitely have a lot of people smarter than me working on it. But
Yeah.
one thing that we're doing here at Schneider is we're really betting on the digitization, right, and diversification of electricity, right, and driving these types of development. So it is an exciting time.
Great. Matt, this is a solar soup to nuts operation. You're going to provide solar panels, battery storage, and EV charging options for each home. Why is bundling all of that so important?
So I would say the opportunity here when we bundle, I wanted to layer on a little bit about, the discussion. I'll come back to that with Will is, you asked about net metering and that speaks to this. So in the case of
Yeah.
net metering, we're generating electricity and giving that back to the utility during the day. But by bundling the storage system into the home and the community battery energy storage system into the subdivision, instead of sending electricity back during the middle of the day when it may be lower value, that electricity from the panel is charging the battery, right? And then in the evening time, when the cost of electricity has significantly increased, we get to discharge that back to the utility. So by coupling the two technologies together, you're actually getting a better value for the energies that you're generating by distributing it to the grid at a time that the grid needs it more. And then when you put these things together, the economics to the homeowner. So first of all, these are all electric homes where the solar system has been designed to offset all of the electricity consumption of the average homeowner. So they're designed for the home to begin with, which optimizes the construction, design, installation costs. And then it's optimized for the battery system that's going into the home as well. And through our analysis of this subdivision, we determined that there would be enough capacity once these during the day for these solar systems in the subdivision to not only charge the home battery, but perhaps excess charging to go to the community battery as well. So that battery will largely remain topped off, and is all designed as basically a complete bundle. And then with respect to the electric vehicle charging, that infrastructure is in every single home. We're seeing a very significant number of customers opt to actually have the charger installed at time of construction. So they could install one technically later, but they're opting to upgrade their purchase to include that with the system. So, and then of course, all of these are smart devices. So we've got apps that control and talk to the solar system, that talk to the battery, that give the homeowners much more control over their energy than they're typically accustomed to having.
So in California, there you were talking about different rates of electricity. Do you have demand charges for residential in California?
We do not have demand charges. What we have are time of use charges. So generally speaking, during the day up until about 4 o'clock, your energy is at a much lower cost, and throughout the night, it's at a much lower cost. So if you were to charge your vehicle, most people today would do it during the night when the time of use rate is lower. We then go into a peak and a critical peak rate in the afternoon, and there are a couple of rate options that most homeowners can choose from, but generally the principle is the same. Between about 4 and 9 p.m., the rates are as much as double or more than the rate during the day.
Wow, that's quite a bit. And I can see how the battery storage can really help in reducing the overall cost, actually.
Right. So the battery storage systems are designed to discharge that stored energy during
Right,
those peak periods. In
exactly.
addition to that, we've got customers who, this is sort of part of the flexible load component of the project, where there are devices in the home that SunPower works with the manufacturers, the air conditioner manufacturer, the water heater manufacturer, so that we can actually control those loads to consume less energy during those peak periods. So you can, say, for example, pre-cool your home in the late afternoon before 4 o'clock, and then turn your air conditioner off, for several hours. You have to remember these homes are built extremely efficient. They hold their temperature really well, allowing you to basically implement control features that further reduce the consumption of the home and save the homeowner money.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right, gentlemen, let's take a break. But coming up in the second part of my discussion with Will Shippee from Schneider Electric and Matt Brost from SunPower, Will talks about the possibility of retrofitting their technologies for older homes.
We're absolutely focusing on taking the learnings of this project, right, and commercializing it into a repeatable solution as much as possible. You can bet that we've been having plenty of discussions with other developers looking at these types of solutions.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.